As you all may have noticed, my husband is out of town. Lex is here helping out, but I have this distinct feeling that Lena's going to be a distraction through most of the service, and I apologize for that. Today we're starting a new sermon series, and this is a sermon series based on the life of, oh, I got to see this. So, the life of John Wesley. And Jansen obviously had some fun with Photoshop. But the life of John Wesley and how it teaches us, and really not just John, but really the early Methodist movement, how it teaches us about our own faith. So we're talking today about what it means to revive our faith and what that looks like in our lives. So there will be a couple of baseball metaphors, and that's just because it looked like fun. So how many of you know baseball? Oh, good. So in the fall of 2013, I went to my first ever professional baseball game. I went to a Twins game. We went to Target Field, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was a beautiful night. It was the September, just gorgeous fall night. I'm just going to move this. No, you're fine. I'm not going anywhere. We went with my brother and his girlfriend. We had a lot of fun. We got those nachos in the little helmet, and of course we still have the little helmet, and they play with it all the time. We had great seats. We were along the third baseline, and we had lots of space around us because, well, if you have any memory for these things, the Twins weren't doing so hot that year. In fact, this was their last home game of the season, and they weren't going to make it into the postseason. So it was a fun night. Everybody who showed up was just there to enjoy a little baseball. They weren't really worried about what the outcome of the game was. It wasn't going to affect anything, except for the other team. And it was fun. After a while, the game got kind of boring because the Twins were kind of bad at this point. Cleveland had scored 3 runs in the 4th inning, and they were another each in the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning. So they were up 6-1 when we got to the 9th inning. But it was a beautiful night, and we were hanging out, and so we weren't going to leave. We had wandered the field and checked out everything and done all the things. And again and again, well, they struck out. But what happened in the 9th inning was suddenly they started to score. So they went from 6-1 all the way to 6-5 in the bottom of the 9th. And it was crazy. The emotions involved in this game were so heightened. And there weren't that many of us in the stadium, and really we were mostly around Cleveland fans. Okay, lean. Never mind, I'm just going to ignore her. But everybody was on the edge of their feet. People were standing, everybody was excited. And of course they struck out and didn't win. But this was the best of what baseball can be, where a good baseball game, in my opinion, kind of gives you breaks. There's a lot of downtime in between exciting things. And so, especially when you're out, just tell me if she's doing something dangerous. Especially when you're out at a field instead of watching it or listening to it, you have downtime to talk to the people around you and to play with whatever exciting. When you go to like a Red Hawks game, they do all these extra things to make it a little bit more fun because there are these downtimes. But then there's these really exciting moments, like this for this game, where we suddenly got 5 runs in 1 inning, and we were going to make it, and we were going to win, and we didn't. But you get there. So there are times that our faith is like this. Now think about those emotions of a baseball game where you have those dry spells and you have those moments that are kind of boring and you get distracted by the nachos and the helmet and what's going on at the pro shop and you want to go look at all the other things. But then there are times that the excitement is overwhelming and it's all you can focus on. So for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about revival, what it means to revive our faith, our individual faith, as well as the faith of a community. And what we're going to do is look through the beginnings of the Wesleyan tradition. So our scripture today comes from the book of Isaiah, from chapter 57, just 2 verses, 14 and 15. And it should be up there. It shall be said, build up, prepare the way. Remove every obstruction from my people's way. For thus says the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with those who are contrite and humble in spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite. And then again, from a paraphrase from Revelation 2, to the angel of the church in Ephesus I write, I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance, but I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember then from what you have fallen, repent and do the works you did at first. So this is the story of God for the people of God. So often our faith feels like this. That faith, that religion in general can be like those middle innings in a baseball game. We get distracted, we lose the excitement. Now the earliest Methodist, so here's a little bit of history for those of you who like history. The earliest Methodist movement started a revival of faith in England and in the U.S. Over the next few weeks as we tell that story and our own story about reviving our own faith. So in the late 1600s and the early 1700s, this is when Wesley was born and all of this, the Church of England and really all of English society was struggling. If you know your English history at all, there had been a few troubles with, we'll say, the various monarchs and their religion. We had the Catholic monarchs and the Protestant monarchs, and you had the time in between where you have the Puritans in control for, I don't even know how long, like 10 years. But every time the monarchy changed between Catholic and Protestant, there were arrests, there were executions, there was people being chased out of their way. If you know, there are, in some of these ancient castles and such, there are these things called priest holes, because in the Protestant England, you could not be Catholic, and so the priest had to hide in the basement. And so they hid the priests from whenever anyone would come near. And so these extremes are what come out of these extremes came a time of stagnation in reality, because people were sick of passion. Funny enough, they were sick of things getting so passionate that people were murdered about it. And so they were sick of religion in general, seeing it more as a danger to themselves, to their friends, to their society than anything else. Christianity had really become quite the dud. So afraid of anyone with passion that boring was all that was left. And out of this comes those who raised John and Charles Wesley, two brothers, 2 out of 19, 2 out of the 10 who survived to adulthood. So that means that John and Charles' parents had 19 children, and they lost 9 of them, whether in birth or right shortly after. These 2 brothers were raised mostly by their mother, who taught them the basics of their faith, which of course included learning Latin and Greek. I'm sure all of you teach your children Latin and Greek at home. You know, get out the good old Bible and start teaching the original languages, throw some Hebrew in there. She taught them and she formed them and she influenced their faith strongly throughout their lives. Their father was a pastor, and he spent much of his time away from home, either because he was doing something political in some other place, or because he was in debtor's prison. He would borrow money to, probably help raise these 19 children, and sometimes he would borrow from his own church members, and then they would send him to debtor's prison because he didn't pay them back, and they were mad at him. His church members, they did not get along very well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But he always returned to the congregation, even after they started his house on fire. There's this story, John Wesley the whole family was home and the roof started on fire. And it's fairly understood that someone within the church started the parsonage on fire. So please don't do that. I will not be as forgiving as Samuel Wesley. Forgiveness and the desire to get past differences was strong in Samuel. And so this was a strong influence in John and Charles. Even though his parents weren't always perfect, they affected his life incredibly. And so the time and place of their upbringing was a time of spiritual dryness, something Wesley struggled with himself for many years. By personal spiritual dryness, I think about the times in our lives when faith feels off. When there are times in our lives when there is wide and deep emotion and immediate understanding of faith and truth, but there are also times in our faith when we are overwhelmed by God's presence. But there are times that are a lot more like 18th century England, where we have lost our passion, where they would turn to selfishness, to ambition, to prejudice, to hatred. And in the face of their turning away from God, whether intentionally or simply through their own lethargy. And so God calls them back, calls them to renewal, calls them to revival, to turn back to God, to pour water on the dry, cracked land of their souls, to get started on returning to God, to rally in their faith. But what does that look like? What does it take to refill our souls? That's what I'm going to have us talk about today. At this point in the worship service, we have a time of discussion. For those of you who are new with us, I'll give a couple of questions to ask of the group. You can talk amongst yourselves. You can talk with those you're sitting next to, you came to church with. You can talk with the strangers around you. If you're talking to somebody you don't know, ask their name. It's only polite conversation. If you'd rather not talk to anyone, my cell phone number is on the screen, and you can send me a text, and I'll bring it into the larger conversation. I'm also going to walk around a little bit. After about 5 minutes, we'll gather back together and find our answers together. So our questions are, have there been times when you've experienced a spiritual dry spell? And talk about it. And our second question is, how have you found your way back to faith? So the questions are on the screen. Go ahead and talk amongst yourselves. So my challenge for you all, just like I challenged the kids to pray for the people in their lives, to pray for their siblings, I hope that you will pray for the people in your lives so that you can be a lot like Susanna. That's her name, by the way, John and Charles' mom. So that the people in your lives, the kids in your lives, the adult children in your lives, they know that you care for them in ways that go beyond, are they sleeping through the night? Praying for their souls as much as you pray for your own when you're struggling. And so that's my challenge. Think about people in your life, adults, children, me, who need prayer. Prayer to sustain them, prayer to support them. And there are people so many of us have people in our lives who are not connected to God, who we know don't really have that connection. Shh, you're okay. And praying for them is a way of loving them. And when it comes to especially adult children who don't have faith, this is a question I get that gets brought up a lot. How do I care for my child who has walked away? How do I care for my grandchildren when my kids don't really care about them coming to church? How do I care in ways that aren't pushy? Nobody wants to be the pushy parent. Nobody wants to be that way. And the first part is always to pray. Nobody can stop you from praying, no matter what they say. Prayer is internal. You can pray anywhere and about anyone you like. You can pray for the people that don't want you to pray for them. But the way that we show the love of God is important, and it's especially important for people who are, leery of church, or leery of faith, or leery of God because of tragedy, because they just walked away, because 1,000 different reasons. And so when we begin with prayer and we ask God how to help us to talk to them, to help us connect with them, that's an important part. So take the challenge to pray for somebody new in your life, to make a plan, or just change how you're praying for the people in your lives. But let us stand and receive the benediction today.